Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was January 10th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcora Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is weird. I mean, if you look at the image of this document, it's like a mess. Because it's... So basically it's on the inside cover of the back cover of the register. And as you're looking at the picture that the Archive of the Crown of Aragon has produced for this, you can see a lot of the preservation practices from earlier eras. Like in other documents, we've seen how archivists from long ago had used reinforcing paper underneath and around the edges of a document that had been attacked by worms, and also how the maybe like reinforcing paper might be cut with like sort of this curvy edge in order to include some of the writing if it kind of went into the margin a little bit. And so the reinforcement paper will kind of, have this like little peninsula cut out of it in order to accommodate where there was some additional writing. We see a similar tearing out happening here, where it's clear that there was like a knife taken to this reinforcement paper in order to make sure that we could read this Latin inscription. And by the way, I just said reinforcement paper, but as I'm looking at it and noticing the texture of this kind of top surface reinforcement material here, it looks like it could be parchment. It looks like it could be a little bit thicker than paper, and it has kind of a texture to it that reminds me of parchment. So it's very possible that at some point the archival reinforcement work that was done here utilized parchment, because parchment is sturdier than paper when we're talking about the long term of this material. One other thing I want to point out about this material is that you can see all of the holes on the right side of the image here. Those holes are part of the original binding of these papers into some kind of unit, and the string would have gone through those holes as a way of connecting all of the different pieces of the paper together. And so you can see how it was very thick, right? This very thick volume because of the number of holes that we can observe there. And so that everything you see in the hole part of it, that's how you know that that's the side of this. Like if it's a book and it's laying on a table, like that part is going to be vertical where those holes are, and then the cover is folded over. So that is a really interesting glimpse into some of the history of the material format of these record books. And I'm really not clear about which kind of bindings were used originally, when they were bound originally, and then when they were taken out of their bindings and given new bindings. There is literature on that, but I have not, for all of my love of the archive of the Crown of Aragon, I haven't really gotten into the details of those questions. So now we're looking at the back cover of a volume in the treasury records. So we're not in the Cancelleria Real, we're not in the Royal Chancery records, we're instead in the Patrimonio Real, which is the treasury records. And we've looked at a treasury record once before. It was actually way back toward the beginning of the podcast in episode 5. But today, instead of a payment record, we're looking at this notice that essentially just kind of closes out this record book, because it is the treasury record book of King Pere the Ceremonious, who has died. So they're not going to let him spend any money anymore, because once you're dead, you don't get to do that anymore. So this notice in the back is like literally closing the book on the reign of King Pere the Ceremonious, the long reign, over 50 years of King Pere the Ceremonious. It's in Latin, and actually this Latin is very accessible to me. So the first few words here are actually pretty standard words that commemorate someone's death. The first words here are migravit ab hoc seculo. And what that translates to is he departed from this earthly world. So migravit, you can sort of detect in there an English word that we have that derives from this, migration, right? Moving. So in this sense, though, he's departing. He's moving with kind of like a one-way ticket. And then we have ab hoc from this, and then the word seculo. Seculo is basically, it's a name for a world. It's a word for world in Latin, but it's got a real kind of earthly world kind of meaning to it, because there's other words that if you want to use world you can use besides seculo. So this is really to emphasize that he has left the earthly world, he's gone on into the heavenly world. And then after that phrase we've got the illustrious and magnificent Prince and Lord of all of these dominions, and then there's the list of all of the dominions where, it starts with Aragon and then Valencia, and then you've got Sardinia in there, and so a long list of all these different territories. And then in the fourth line in the middle, you have the date, the number 5, quinta, and then D-I-E, D-A, day, 5th day of January. And then you've got the year in the next line. Right below the word DA, you can see septimo very clearly. That's the 7 in 1387. So here we've got another corroboration of the date of Pere's death. And then what comes after that is a statement about when he was interred, like when he was buried. And that is listed as the 10th day. So right below Septimo, there's another DA, and before that is an X. That, folks, is an X. Oh my gosh, that used to drive me crazy when I was starting out with the paleography, to see that in the middle of a word in a letter and to remember that that is how the letter X is written. Ooh, it took me so much getting used to, but now it feels like very obvious when I see that that is an X. So the 10th day and of the month in that year mentioned before. So remember how Violante, in a document we looked at a little while ago, said we're burying Pere on Tuesday? She was writing that to Marti. Well, the 10th was not the next Tuesday. It's Thursday. And so why is the plan changed? Maybe they were waiting for Marti. They weren't waiting for Joanne, because I think Joanne is pretty sick at this point. But, Joanne, I think, had written off his father at this point and was like, you can just put the dude in the ground and don't wait for me. I don't know. Maybe Joanne was a little torn up that he couldn't be there for his father's funeral. Speaking of this, I don't know if you had the chance to see the HBO TV show Succession, but whenever I think of Pere the Ceremonious, and part of it is that I was watching that show as I was first learning about Pere, he is such a Logan Roy type of person. Logan Roy in the TV show Succession is like this, the patriarch who's kind of at the end of his life, but he's still trying to like do power plays and like mess with the heads of his kids, and it's all ego driven and total like sort of narcissist and womanizer, whole kind of deal. So I really see a lot of similarity between the character of Logan Roy in the HBO series Succession and Pere the Ceremonious. And I just want to say, maybe I can give a little eulogy about the eulogy scene, the funeral scene in Succession. That's what I was also trying to talk about, which is that whole funeral scene is really like how I imagine a lot of the way that this funeral must have gone for Pere, because he just made so many people angry at the very end. But he had his cultured moments, like he when he wanted to tell Joanne not to marry Violante, what did he do? He wrote a poem, and he did have some cultural interests and did patronize the arts, and there were some. He was a multi-dimensional person. But, I cannot let Pere go without relating to you my favorite anecdote that, to me, really encapsulates all that Pere the Ceremonious was capable of. Because remember, this guy, he was forged in fire. When he started his reign, he was super young, and he had a rebellion right away from those pretenders that his stepmother had kind of used as a way to try to contest Pere's reign at the very beginning. And then after that, he had some of the cities rise up against him and try to break off from the Crown of Aragon. So this rebellion that I'm talking about now is called the Union Rebellion. And so there's this moment at the end of it when Pere has crushed the Union uprising, and the city of Valencia had been really like the most rebellious of all the cities. And part of what they did, at one point they had captured Pere and like humiliated him, like paraded him through the town and like made him dance at one point. It was like really like, brutal humiliation tactics. So at the end, Pere is so incensed with the rebels of Valencia that he comes up with his own very special way of executing them when they're defeated. The rebel leaders of Valencia had used the town's bell tower as a way to organize themselves and rally themselves for military conflict against Pere's forces. So the bells were like very much associated with the rebellion. And so what Pere did is he took those bells, he had them taken out of the tower and melted down. And then he rounded up all of the defeated rebel leaders that he had captured, and he had the molten iron from those bells poured down their throats. Ugh. Just really like Game of Thrones level kind of execution method here. So, that's my eulogy for Pere the Ceremonious. Oh, but I do have to say, the man loved his archive. He really did. There's these stories of the scribes just like losing their minds because Pere is ordering them to reorganize the way that they're doing all the record keeping, developing all these additional categories of, okay, everything about Sardinia is going to go into this, and everything about Majorca is going to go into this. Oh, but if it has to do with this person, it's going to go here. And like all these different, so they're going crazy trying to figure out like, oh my gosh, which register should I write down this letter in, because the number of types of registers completely ballooned because Pere, he had ideas about organizational behavior and record keeping, and that was one of his passions. And that's one of the reasons why his cognomen is Pere the Ceremonious. So, okay, I gave you maybe like a little bit of a backhanded positive spin on Pere there. Oh, Pere the Ceremonious. I think there are people that really consider his reign very successful. A lot of military historians in particular. So here we've got a guy who was, I think, very much the kind of traditional masculine type of medieval king. And just keep all this in mind as we move forward and look at how Joan is going to be very different and how Violante is going to be involved in creating that difference. All right, I think that does it for today's episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Moltcara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.